some familiar faces. I've got Ross John joining me. I've got Matt Hill and Ed Schindler. And Frank John is in the background as well. If you recall, Frank was wished a happy birthday. Was it last? No, it was 2 shows ago, huh?
No, it was last week.
Was it last week? How old are you, Frank?
24.
24, all right. Geez, still, I won't tell you what you still smell like at that age. But anyway.
That's pretty good.
All right, and of course I got Merlin Thompson, who you won't hear or see, but he's filming, and we're posting up the YouTube videos as he can get them produced and get them put up. I'm linking them on my Facebook group page, so if you want to see what we look like when we're having fun here, by all means check out the Facebook group page, or just go to YouTube. You can find Merlin Thompson's channel there. But I think are you tagging them as Let's Talk Native? Okay, so if you search Let's Talk Native, you can find it, or even perhaps by name. If you tag my name or keyword my name, you can find it that way. But the videos are going up. He's refining them as we go, so the product gets better each week. And again, I know some people would prefer audio or video over audio, so now we've got one more option there. And of course, if you're listening on the radio and you're having any trouble receiving this thing, you can always go to kb1520.com. Go to my page there. I'm in the staff section. I've got a media player for a live stream there, or you can go to my blog, which is letstalknativepride.blogspot.com, or just search Native Pride, and I've got a media player up in the corner, in the right corner on the sidebar that web streams the show as well. And of course, both on my blog and on my KB page, I've got many of the shows, previous shows, including last week's and obviously the weeks leading up to it. So anytime you want to check those shows out, you can take a look at some of the previous shows. One of the things and I notice this even with the stuff that I write on my blog. Even if you go back a couple of years, and I've been doing my blog since I think 2008. Most of the articles are fairly timeless. The issues haven't changed much. The position that certainly that I paid for hasn't changed much at all. I'm not saying that I'm unmovable on some of these subjects, but I think for any of us who have been involved in Native issues over the years, we understand the issues, and the positions that we take are usually based on experience that that is long enough that it'll take a while for the views that we have to change, so we're pretty much entrenched in the philosophy and the view we have on these subjects. So, like I said, if you check the older shows or you check any of the older posts on my blog, you'll find that even something several years old is pretty relevant. Let's Talk Native has been on the air for 2 years, and you can find many of those shows on the 2 sites that I mentioned earlier. We're going to have a pretty spirited conversation. We got two specific issues that we're going to tackle for this show. We've had some disturbing recent activity on, particularly in Cattaraugus, both with the raids from the ATF a couple of weeks ago that we spoke of, but even more recently we've had Erie County sheriffs that have really been pretty aggressive in how they're conducting themselves within the sovereign territory of the Seneca Nation. And we're going to address that a little bit in this first hour, and then in the second hour we're going to talk about the recent debacle that has occurred with certain Seneca officials announcing a major press conference that was going to demonstrate missing funds from the Seneca Nation, and then held a press conference where they were basically taking shots at the Seneca Diabetes Foundation, which is really a good, it's a philanthropic organization that does a lot of good work. And we're going to talk about how low the Seneca Nation election politics has gotten with trying to drag not only the Seneca Diabetes Foundation, but the good people who have been a part of it, the good people who have sponsored and have donated, the good people who have been a part of the fundraising events, and of course the attempt that was made by the current sitting Seneca Nation president was to try to somehow slander Barry Snyder, who is one of the candidates for president of the Seneca Nation, because he is the chairman of and founder of the Seneca Diabetes Foundation. So we're going to talk about that in the second hour. I know I've heard from a few people that are interested in the subject who are not in studio, so we may even get a call or two on that subject. And certainly the folks that are sitting here in studio are very knowledgeable both about the subject we're going to tackle first, and the Seneca diabetes issue, the foundation issue. I know Ross John, you in particular, you were a part of that organization. I think you sat on that advisory board.
Advisory board, I was still to this day. I sit there.
Okay, so I mean, we're going to be able to address some of the issues and some of the claims that were made. Some of them are a little bit preposterous, but we're going to address those issues. And again, that's primarily going to be tackled in the second hour. But first, I really want to address. There's been one incident in particular that almost has become a bit of a forcing function on the issue with outside law enforcement on our territories. Now, first and foremost, I know the outside agencies think that they have the legal authority to force their way onto our territories, and they have laws that they have passed that they say allows them to do so. The problem is, we haven't given them that permission, and it doesn't matter how much they legislate or how much a court rules that they can diminish our sovereignty. If we haven't given it up, then it hasn't been given up. And you know, you'll hear policing agencies and even some of our own people. You'll hear them say that there was a statute, U.S. 232 and 233, which has allowed New York State to involve themselves and take jurisdiction on civil and criminal matters on the territory. Well, I got to tell you, that thing was passed in the early 50s. We weren't at that table. We didn't give them permission to do it. And it doesn't matter how much the federal government tries to pass jurisdiction onto the state. Frankly, we haven't ever given the federal government that right. So when they try to pass that jurisdiction onto the state, and we're not at the table, this is not an equitable provision that changes the status quo in terms of our relationship between our native territories and the federal government. I mean, and the fact of the matter is that even the treaties that they wrote, they make it very clear that the United States will not claim our territories. Well, if they don't claim to own our territories, if they recognize in treaties that are still celebrated every year, if they recognize those things in treaties, then how can they turn around and say that they've somehow bestowed or granted, is the word they use, granted jurisdiction to a state? And that's what we're going to get into a little bit. First, let me reintroduce Matt Hill. Matt, you're regular on the program. I know we're going to go to break in about 5 minutes, but let's set the stage a little bit about. Explain to the audience exactly how you've gotten involved in this issue, not only because of the events that took place last week, but just in general.
It's been growing for a while. I've taken an interest in what our sovereignty is and looking to defend what we still have left. I was looking to do a meeting like this at a later time after the elections because it was kind of a hot topic. You know, I didn't want to have to use it for political reasons, nor do I intend to use it for.
Or let anybody else use it for political reasons.
And that's not my goal here. But with the events that came up last week that involved my family, my immediate family, or my cousin anyway, and so it brought it close to home, you know, and so I'd like to address that a lot sooner. So I mean, it's not just for my family, but for everybody involved in the nation.
Well, and it doesn't, you know, let's face it, the aggression from the ATF coming on a couple of weeks ago, putting guns to people's heads and that kind of stuff, it begs the question on the appropriateness of an outside law enforcement agency coming in with that kind of aggression, and frankly, you know, with packing that kind of heat. There really is a potential for a major conflict here. I mean, just briefly for now, and we'll go over it in more detail later on, but briefly kind of go over what the scenario was, you know, as it transpired last week.
Well, from what I understand, the sheriffs came onto the territory to arrest a individual who was involved in an incident off the territory, and they acted on a report from the other party to the incident. They went to the guy's house and basically dragged him out of the house with no search warrant, no charges pressed right away. The guy was just, you know, in the dark of what the charges were.
Well, in the incident that transpired off territory, it was not a violent incident.
No, it wasn't a violent incident that I know of.
And it doesn't appear that it was a major theft or vandalism or anything like that.
No, not that I know of. It's just it's just a matter that could have been taken at a later time. You know, it wasn't with the fierceness that they came in with. It wasn't needed.
Well, and again, so this is an event that began off territory, and essentially not a domestic violence situation, but a bit of a domestic dispute that happened off territory. There was no physical conflict and no no major crime committed there. And yet it turns out that the Erie County Sheriffs felt it was important enough for them to pursue this issue that same night. And at 1 o'clock in the morning,
yep.
Ends up, sneaking up on a house with flashlights and end up using those flashlights as weapons and striking some people with it and dragging somebody around.
Yep.
And again, guns drawn from what we understand.
I have no idea. I don't know, but they did have them. I imagine they would have sidearms in any kind of situation like that. I can't see them taking them off at the road. But from what I understand, that's what our laws are, the Seneca Nation laws are, that the police agencies are not allowed to carry weapons onto private property.
Well, and now we have two incidents within a fairly, between the ATF doing this, coming on with weapons and locked and loaded and that kind of thing.
The main reason I'd like to address this is for the safety of the people. I mean, at any time, if people got weapons there, that has the potential for, bad things happening.
Well, and let's be clear. It wasn't even just the actions; it was some of the things that were said that evening. Yeah. It appears that these sheriffs, and there were 3 of them, were very disrespectful. They basically condemned the peacekeeping force that's on the territory, the Seneca Marshals. When it was asked of them, why aren't there marshals here? They basically called them down.
Yep.
And then when the issue of sovereignty was raised, they basically said your sovereignty is a joke.
Yep.
So you have sheriff's department employees. You have sheriffs that are on territory, showing a complete lack of respect for the fact that they're in an area that is not the same as off territory. They show no distinction whatsoever.
Yeah, there is a protocol that they're supposed to follow, and that's totally being ignored.
Well, and we'll get into some of the details. And I know, Ed, you want to weigh in on this after the break. But we're going to take a break right now, and we're going to come back, and we're going to talk about this issue. In fact, we're going to dedicate this whole first hour, or what's left of it, to talking about these issues, talking about some of the things that you have planned, including a meeting that's coming up tomorrow. But we'll take care of that after the break. Again, this is John Kane with Ross John, Matt Hill, and Ed Schindler in studio. And this is Let's Talk Native. We'll be right back. Matt Hill and Ross John in studio. We're talking about essentially the protocols and the basic relationship between law enforcement agents off our territory and what is the policy when people come onto sovereign lands, and in this case in particular, Seneca lands. We know that this issue has been tenuous over the years, and it is ebbed and flowed. And in fact, as you explained, Ross, we always get to the point where some of these officers, whether it's the sheriff's department or the state police or whomever, these guys kind of get this cowboy mentality, and they kind of raise the stakes to the point where there becomes more aggression. Then there's a certain level of pushback. Then you look within a community, and you find sometimes the community can be divided, or the elected officials can be divided, and it turns into something that festers to the point where there's some major pushback by the people.
It ultimately does, and we've gone through this dance time and time before. It really does always happen by outside law enforcement that doesn't want to respect. There's often, it often also is escalated by what we'll call is the cowboy in the crowd as far as law enforcement is concerned. When they don't understand the dialogue and the relationship, and they're just taking the directive, but they take it way too far.
Well, and it gets to the point where it's not just about a lack of sensitivity. It goes more than just bordering on racism, because when some of the derogatory statements that get made by these officers from time to time really take shots at the native issue.
That's hate. That's more than prejudice. That's more than just a bias. That now you're getting into somebody's real seated hate about.
Well, and it's not just here. I mean, I'm Mohawk. I'm very familiar with some of the circumstances that have existed in Akwesasne, and even on the other side of the imaginary line in Ganawage and places like in Oswego. This issue is an underlying tension that always exists because that relationship is never very well defined. And when you have legislation that gets passed that we are never a part of, that makes these assumptions of authority that really have no foundation in law, not any law that would be recognized internationally. And I know you, Matt, for instance, you became bothered by some of this for a while, and in fact, you actually started a Facebook group page called DWI.
Yeah, that was the beginning of my interest in this, as I'm seeing a lot of these patrols on a territory. And the basic understanding that was for long standing was that they couldn't be the sheriffs or state police couldn't be on territory without a martial escort.
Well, and let's be clear, what's DWI stand for?
Driving while Indian.
Right, and so and I know you've asked people, and a few people have posted and
put their stories,
their personal stories, their personal issues, and and we want to encourage that even here tonight.
Yeah.
If you look for DWI, Driving While Indian, it's just DWI Facebook group page.
Yeah.
Feel free, if you're native or if you're non-native and you've seen some of these incidents, by all means, feel free to post your comments or ask some questions. And we realize that some people, there are people all over the map on this issue. Frankly, there's some people within our territories who absolutely believe that the state and the federal government should have unfettered access to our territories. Mm-hmm. That's not a predominant thought within our territories, but oftentimes you'll see once people get into these positions of legal authority, elected positions, for instance, they find themselves in very compromised positions, and oftentimes they'll make decisions or create policy based on their personal views rather than basing it on native sovereignty, on their history, or thinking about the negative ramifications of yielding some of this.
Mm-hmm. I want to just make this statement right now before we get too far into this. That I'm not against law, or I'm not for lawlessness. I'm for fairness here, because I don't want people to think that I'm totally against the police here and not having the ability to come on and arrest people. I don't want people to on our side thinking that they can do whatever they want on a territory either. I mean, what I want to make awareness is the protocols. We're going to keep saying the protocols of how it's supposed to be done.
Well, and I'm not. I guess perhaps I am a little bit more of an advocate for lawlessness, and I want to qualify that.
Well,
I'm not
safety. I'm thinking in regards to safety now.
Well, because people, there is this belief, and this is a predominant belief within the non-native community, that if you write something down on a piece of paper, that somehow you can write it on a piece of paper and that's going to solve a problem. And that's basically what a law is. A law is where somebody in their infinite wisdom thinks they can write some words on a paper and they're going to say, there, now it's a law, now we've solved the problem, or we've addressed the problem. And to me, and this goes back to the Gairnagoa, and Ed, you can feel free to weigh in on this thing. Nature has tension. And sometimes it's not about good versus evil. It's just tension that exists in nature. And the one thing about the Gairnagoa, and of course, those who listen to the show regularly know I'm always going to go here, but what happens with this tension is nature finds ways to resolve that tension. And it could be as simple as looking at one tree growing taller than another in the woods, or a population of a certain species that gets overgrown and then become more victims of somebody's dinner for the predators in the field. I mean, it can be as simple as that. But within our communities, we came up with this concept of the Gairnagoa, which is a path. It is a great path that we can follow to resolve conflict. Now, I know people have grown accustomed over the years to referring to the Gairnagoa as the great law of peace, but it isn't that. Neither the word peace nor the word law is in the definition, literal definition of the Gairnagoa. Now, law is something, there is this concept of natural law, and that's what we, even by definition of what a republic is, when they say that somebody has an inherent right. An inherent right is a natural right. It is a right to life. It is a right to pursue life and to sustain life. Those are natural laws. It doesn't matter whether somebody writes it down or not. We all acknowledge that it's wrong to kill somebody for no good reason. And we know that there's certain things that are wrong without it ever being written down. So, I mean, there is this concept of natural law, and it doesn't need to be written. It is one of those things that there's a full range of those things that almost everybody can come to a consensus on. The question is, when you start creating these bodies of law, especially bodies of law that allow people to inflict violence on one another, and in this case, whether it's the police doing it, or whether it's a court that could sentence somebody to death, or to imprisonment, confinement, or whether it empowers one person over another person. These are the kinds of laws that, frankly, you can call me lawless when it relates to that. And the thing that we do within the Gaya Nagoa is that we talk about resolving conflict and not being judge and jury, but resolving it through consensus and resolving it through bringing parties that do not have the same mind by bringing those minds together. And feel free to chime in on it, Ed.
What I would like to share is that what we're referring to in terms of the Kainosekwa is that it's really a responsibility of the people to help people comprehend the idea of problem resolution, conflict resolution. Those are things which are part of the responsibility of the people, the community, so that we can continue addressing needs, whatever they may be. We can address the needs as one mind, as one people, okay? And that's opposite from what you see within Western culture law. Western culture law literally turns over an individual or a group to the what they refer to as the police and to the court system, and they basically, like you say, they imprison them, they confine them. They don't resolve the issue. What they do is they literally take the individuals out of the picture. That doesn't resolve issues. What that does is simply confine people.
Well, historically, they would even enslave them to some extent.
Yes, and it's not something that's new. It's something that they did a long time ago, and they brought it over here, and they've been trying to do that since they've gotten here. And it's so opposite because people have to come to the understanding that what exists today, the United States of America, does not exist based upon what they came from with in their minds when they came from Europe. They found it over here. They found the concept of freedom. They found the concept of justice. They found the concept of equality and representation over here. It didn't exist in Europe. And I keep mentioning this because it's really important to understand the difference between their laws and them trying to impose their laws on our territory and what we actually have as a people, and the need to resolve concerns. And I think that's something that people have to be aware of, because what's going to continue happening is what we've talked about before, is there's going to be a conflict that's going to grow and grow.
Well, and let's talk about that. Now, if you consider that, now clearly we're suggesting that there's miles of separation between the view that we held in terms of how to resolve conflict and what European culture and what people know as Western culture has developed. But so when we look at those clear distinctions, how do we resolve that? Well, I mean, we did it through respect, and it gets down to the Goswanta, or Deohade. It basically says, look, you have your ways, and your ways are fine for you, but you have to understand that we have our ways, and we will not impose each other's will on each other. I mean, and that, a lot of people will refer to the canoe and the vessel on the river of life, and that's the way it was presented when it was presented to the Dutch in the 1600s. But this Goswanta was something that we had long before that. It is something that that in many ways is almost tied to the creation story. It talks about the respect. It's tied to the Ganonyo, to the Ohunda Gariwa Dekwa, those words we say when we start a meeting, the opening. It talks about the respect that we have, because we all recognize that we have paths, and that those paths need to demonstrate the mutual respect for those paths. So even now, you bring it more current than that. Even if you want to, and I'm not a big fan of treaties, you guys know I always call them down, but even if you want to look at Canandaigua Treaty, Article 7 of the Canandaigua Treaty, they wrote it, we didn't. They made it very clear that if we had a conflict, if there was some sort of crime or offense committed by a native person against a non-native, then they would petition and they would let our people resolve that issue. And if there was a crime committed by a non-native to a native, then again, we would petition them and they would resolve it within their culture. And that was the mutual respect. And that's called out in a treaty, Article 7 of Canandaigua Treaty. And of course, what they added at the end was, this shall be the way until the great legislature makes other equitable provisions. Well, if they're referring to the great legislature being their Congress, well, that's fine that they said that, but how can you use the word equitable provision if they think they can just legislate over us? And essentially, anytime I hear this 232 and 233 brought up, that is not an equitable provision. We weren't at the table. They passed this thing in 1952. I mean, so it's an ancient thing that was done at a time when, frankly, our people would not even have been aware what they were passing. So we weren't at the table. So again, I don't want to beat you up on the whole lawlessness thing. I think that there's a certain level of appropriateness on how on what the relationship should be with outside law enforcement. And I'm not saying that there aren't certain things that that are warranted, but we've got to draw the line on what is warranted and what is going to be the policy. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to keep on this thing, and maybe I'll let Matt finish the thought for a change.
That's the wrong word.
All right. This is John Kane with the crew. This is Let's Talk Native. We'll be right back. All right. Thanks for coming back. When I was at your house the other day, Ross, I saw Jack Weatherford's book, Indian Givers, and there's a quote from Indian Givers that I actually have posted on my blog, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have it right here in front of me. But it basically says the predominant theme of all the writings from the Europeans when they first came to our world was they marveled at the peace and at the order that existed in the absence of kings and queens and courts and prisons and military. They saw for the first time that people could live in harmony, in peace, and be productive in the absence of having some dominant authority over them. And again, and this kind of goes to what we're talking about, Matt. I know what you meant when you were suggesting that you're not advocating lawlessness. What you were really suggesting is that you're not advocating chaos and a free right for people to run over each other. And when we talk about peace and we talk about freedom, there is no such thing as freedom at the expense of somebody else. So go ahead.
I'll make myself clear on that. I did use the wrong word. In our language, we say skano or mohagas skana, which is peace. Peace, or that type of.
Well, and I'm glad you said what you did say, because it allows us to expand on that thought. Because frankly, that's the issue that gets thrown at us. We say, oh yeah, these guys just want to operate in pure lawlessness. And I've heard Native leadership, even in places holier than thou, like Onondaga, where they would always say, well, those guys who are against the police here, they just want lawlessness so they can do bad things. And the thing is, we're not suggesting that. At the end of the day, what you're talking about, Matt, is really directly connected to what we talked about last week and the week before, which is about community responsibility.
Absolutely, and that's why I was working trying to get a meeting tomorrow at the Sailor Building for all community members to come and participate in this to help find a resolve to this. And I hope that we can all come there and come to one mind and find a solution for it.
Okay, so this is the Sailor Building, which was essentially the old recreation building.
Correct.
On the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. This meeting is at what time?
Tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock.
Okay, tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock.
Maybe 5:30 because there's a couple other programs that are.
Okay, so thereabouts. You're gonna
Indian time.
Yeah, we're gonna try to get as many people there to at least have the conversation.
Yes, and a lot of this has to do with people's not current understanding of what the actual protocol is. It's been changed so many times over the years that nobody even knows what the current status of the protocols are. So, I mean, people are going on stuff that's 30 years old, or maybe the police don't even know what.
Well, think about 232 and 233. This is 1952 that this thing was passed, and for anybody to suggest that they could pass this law and they could just impose it upon us without our say-so, obviously it's not that cut and dry, because we're still having this conflict, and this is since 1952.
So, yeah, hopefully we can get the paperwork from the clerk's office, and we can help educate the people as to what those regulations are.
I want to kind of jump in here, because it's, I understand what we're talking about, but ultimately what most of the people are concerned about is the behavior of outside agencies. Mm-hmm. Look, we have just recently had armed agents coming into our territories, places that aren't very far for the kids and elders and everybody into our community. Nowhere else in this country would that be allowed, but everybody just wants to turn their heads to it. Now we're talking about what are we going to do about the abusive behavior of Erie County sheriffs. Then we'll look at all the other agencies that have kind of stepped up. So it's what is the protocol to address these things? And when it gets to the point is that what is the satisfaction back to the body of people? Because I've seen this happen time and time and I'm just old enough to have seen it happen a half a dozen times where it builds up, builds up, builds up. It always happens to a couple of cowboys on law enforcement that want to be overzealous and push and then start getting very abusive. Then people start coming in. And then they want to know what the Erie County sheriffs in this instance are going to do to address the hatred that some of these guys and disrespect that they've had towards our people. Nothing's going to get resolved, and it has nothing to do with whether anybody's guilty of burglary, of domestic abuse, or anything on that matter. It has to do with what are you going to do in order to kind of check these guys in their behavior. What are the consequences that are going to happen to these law enforcement officers?
Yeah, it's fine to suggest that somebody's words can be used against them when they're if they're ever read their Miranda rights. But when these officers come on and they spew the kind of venom that they do, when they disrespect people and they disrespect an entire nation of people by calling down their sovereignty or calling down their marshal service in this case, or calling down them as a people. Almost treating them less than human. This is an issue. So you're right. There's two sides of this thing.
Right.
Is how does the police department, whatever that police agency is, how do they reconcile their issues and address these kinds of egregious acts on their side? And then the flip side is and this is kind of what you're organizing, Matt, is this...
how do we come together as a community to kind of restructure our system of being able to deal with our internal problems?
Well, and we refer to removing the dust, when we talk about cleaning off a wampum belt, but here we don't have to remove the dust from something ancient. A lot of these resolutions that council has passed, are fairly recent.
There was one this past week before the incident even happened that addressed the ability of any non-native to carry a weapon on a territory. As if they're passing through in their vehicle is one thing, but if they're actually out of their vehicle and got it with them, walking on a private property, that's a whole different issue.
Well, and some of this stuff has to be more clearly defined.
Well, but the point is that we've sat here before, and it's always been in the first stages, the first reaction when you sit down and I'm looking at a document here, basically comes from one of the counselors saying that they went in and they talked to trusted representatives from the sheriff's department, and they're going to use their they're going to do their internal review and all the rest of this. But the problem is that it's starting to get to the point where it's the people that want answers. I've seen it where counselors and presidents and everybody else just get set aside, and then the law enforcement agencies on the outside got to realize that there's a point that these guys are powerless if they start pushing too hard, because the people are going to want answers. And the other thing that happens is that then people end up going to them and try to get them to understand the protocols. And then they want to say, well, you guys are being very aggressive, and you guys are going to you guys are in there going to try to endanger law enforcement and people around. And what we normally have to tell them is that, no, we're here because we're trying to prevent something from happening.
So what you're talking about is the internal conflict that brews because of this. Because obviously, if just one counselor decides they're going to tip off the Erie County Sheriff's Department to a potential problem, that doesn't solve the problem. And they can write a report. They can try to smooth this over.
It can make it worse, because what does one counselor have authority to do?
Especially he hasn't met with anybody to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah, I get you on that.
I guess that's what I'm trying to prevent here, is that escalating to that point where the people take it into their own hands.
I'm all for that.
I mean, if we can work something out together now before it even gets to that point, that'd be
well.
ideal,
Again, I don't have a problem with people taking certain things in their own hands. It's what are they taking into their hands? I don't have a problem. Frankly, if the people took more things into their own hands in terms of resolving some of the internal issues, then there wouldn't be the external issues. So I understand what you're saying. You're talking about vigilantism, and so I understand. Or the people getting so angry that they start reacting perhaps physically or violently against the police. So I understand what you're saying. But at some level, the more people get involved in this issue, the more it drives the so-called leadership, and the more it drives this issue to a point where there will be an equitable solution.
I wanted to ask one thing here: is if these guys even thought what would happen if, in the course of coming onto the territory with their weapons drawn or on them. I mean, we got our gaming, or not gaming rules, our hunting rules are a lot different on territory.
Well, and some of them are a little undefined.
Yes.
In fact, I know for a fact that there are certain people who are not above taking a deer in the middle of the night,
And from their kitchen window sometimes.
So the idea of these guys, wandering, through possibly a wooded area to sneak up on a house at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then what if they heard a gunshot because somebody took a deer within earshot of where they were, and they respond to it? I mean, this isn't just about protecting our people. These guys have no idea just how dangerous a situation they've created for themselves. Like you said, I don't think they do take that stuff into consideration. They just think they're big guys.
You got no business being locked. Nope, coming on, being locked and loaded for that situation is just going to turn into.
And most of the stuff can be resolved in a more peaceful manner. And in this specific situation, it could have waited till the next day. There was no valuable personal property that was going to be hocked someplace. There was nothing like that. There was nobody who was going to be fleeing the country or anything else. This was a very easy thing that could have been resolved. In fact, they could have, if they wanted to, they could have taken this case to a judge if they thought there was something heinous enough done that could warrant these guys coming in and thumping people up with their mag lights, including knocking a woman down, hitting the owner of the house as they pushed past him and stepping on him to get to his son in this case, knocking down another woman who was just trying to record what was going on, which is from what I understand took place. If you consider how aggressive they were and the inappropriateness of it based on what they were supposedly investigating, there's just no reason this thing couldn't have waited till there were clearer heads in the next day and found more equitable resolution to this problem.
Sure.
But again, it's the cowboy mentality.
Well, it's pathological. It's a pathological behavior, and somebody has to look at these guys
and the whole time
why they would even approach this way.
And the whole time spewing derogatory remarks,
and almost racial epithets for that matter.
Yeah.
I mean, and you think about it. It is not just reduced to guys carrying guns with a sheriff's badge. I mean, think about Mayor Bloomberg down in New York City suggesting that the governor needs to get his shotgun out and put on a cowboy hat and stand on the thruway and lay the law down. I mean, this is the mentality that sometimes comes from places that you can't even imagine. Now get somebody who's kind of got this huff attitude because they've got a badge and a gun, and they think that somehow empowers them to be an authoritative figure, especially if people don't necessarily on our territory, that we're not as prepared to give them the respect that they think that they should command from us. That sometimes is something that they take personal. Look, it's 1:45, so we're going to take a break. We're going to keep on this subject, and we'll talk a little bit more about the meeting that's coming up tomorrow and kind of what we hope can come out of this. But again, I got Ed Schindler, Matt Hill, Ross John, and myself in studio. This is John Kane with Let's Talk Native. As you know, we've got a pretty full studio, but these aren't the only voices that want to weigh in. We've got a couple of callers on the line, so let me go to, I've got Shirley in Tonawanda. What's going on, Shirley?
I just received a summons to be on the jury, and I'm supposed to report on October 29th at 8:30. And I'm supposed to send in this paper, and if I don't, they're going to come and arrest me, I guess. I don't know. But that's one of the things where they are imposing their laws on us, even though we've told them that we're not subject to these. We don't interfere in their government. If
Well, and what you're bringing up is a great example of kind of the circumstance that we're in. This isn't necessarily about police abuse, but it is again that issue of where does their jurisdiction come into play as they're trying to again assimilate us into their system. I mean, and the bottom line is, you could even cite things like the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This is clearly an attempt by them to drag us almost by force, because if they're going to threaten somebody with either fines or imprisonment for not participating in something like this, it shows the level of aggression. And again, you can hear some of these people on the I think there's a specific board that deals with this whole jury issue. And if I'm not mistaken, your daughter went through some of the same issue as well. Isn't that true?
Yes, and I thought maybe that's why I got this.
Oh, it's payback, huh?
Yeah.
Well, and the crazy thing that even as it related to your daughter, it seemed like to me, if I recall, they almost were willing to make some concessions in her pushing back on this thing about somebody who lived on territory. But didn't somebody even go so far as to make the claim that once a Native person leaves their territory, they're the same as a white man? Didn't they say something to that effect to your daughter?
Yes, that's right. Well, I called that office and asked about why they wanted us to participate, and they told me that once you leave the reservation, you're not considered an Indian anymore.
Well, and of course that is absurd. And this is an issue, and I'm glad you brought it up here, because there are people who listen to this program in higher places than, or at least they believe they're higher places than us. I know Albany listens. I've checked my blog tracker. I know Washington D.C. listens. So at least we're getting this issue out there, and I know that we need to address this whole jury situation. They can't even draft us when it comes to their military service. They certainly can't impose a jury duty upon our people. And again, the problem is most people don't know the extent to which they can impose their will on us. And frankly, the other problem is the people that people perceive as leadership rarely steps up and says the things that they need to say on this issue. So again, it's like we're talking about here with Matt and trying to get a meeting tomorrow in Cattaraugus. Sometimes it really comes down to the people standing up and really asserting where the pushback is going to come from.
Some of this, I've dealt with some of this before, personally, and some of my kids and people around me. And normally what I do is I call them and tell them, look, I'm not coming, I'm Native. And they'll say, well, you send in send in a letter, basically stating that with your identification number, we'll take you off. Personally, that's what I tell my kids to do, but me, I said, no, you take me off. And so I can be a little bit harder line. But I've never been called in. It's like, if you guys want to waste the money and come and get me, I even tease them a little bit. I tell them, okay, I'm coming. If I come there, everybody that's not Native is guilty. And then they say, all right, well, we're not going to call you in, I guess.
Because we know you're guilty of something.
Yeah, we know you guys are guilty of something.
Shirley, they really don't want us on their juries. This is really just about them trying to assert their will over us. Go ahead, Ed.
The other point is that they don't maintain a position that if an American went into Canada, they're no longer American.
That's right.
That's their very own reasoning, and that has to be placed in front of them. Is that, hey, just because you leave America doesn't mean you're no longer American.
But when a horse wanders into a cow pasture, doesn't that become a cow? Oh, okay. Well, I guess I misunderstood then. I've been eating horse all this time. I thought it was cow. Shirley, I appreciate the call. I got another call I want to get to before the hour's done. So I appreciate you calling, and we're going to address this issue some more as time goes on. So thanks for calling.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I got Nancy in Buffalo. Nancy, what's on your mind? Sorry for keeping you holding for so long.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I just had a thought that it might be helpful if there were some training classes set up for the police officers, local and maybe county, maybe state also, where they would have a training class and someone from the Native territories would come and speak, and they could discuss topics covering jurisdiction and protocol, and also sensitivity, towards, people's feelings in terms of officers would have some kind of input.
Well, Nancy, you bring up a good point, and almost every time this issue escalates like this, we always get into the circumstance where a department determines that or the legislators above them determine that sensitivity training is required. And I know that can sound kind of blasé or weak, but I don't necessarily share that view. I think, although sensitivity training sounds, I'm a guy, and of course we're always being accused of not being sensitive, especially by our wives at home. But we are sensitive. But the idea of sensitivity training is because this isn't just about them trying to change their laws to accommodate us. And frankly, I don't like it when they write laws about us either one way or the other. But they need to know that regardless of what their laws say, we don't necessarily see it that way. They need to understand that we don't believe that they have jurisdiction in the same manner that they do. That we have a different view of this stuff, and so sometimes it's not just about them having the law read to them or redefined for them. It's about them becoming more aware that our view is different than theirs, and that's whether you want to call that sensitivity or you want to call it whatever.
I think both topics should be covered. I think if someone from the territories could come and discuss all these topics, jurisdiction as well as attitude and all that kind of thing, I think it could be helpful if someone from the territories explained how the territories view these various topics differently.
And all four of us here will work for food.
Ultimately, it always gets to that point anyways.
Yeah.
So, there's where we get to. What we're trying to say is that before it gets too out of hand, let's get to some kind of dialogue, because whether people realize or not, at least everybody in the studio that I understand is saying, we don't want to see anything happen. We're the ones that are saying, let's have this conversation. But what's going to happen is that it's a political conversation, not a legal conversation. And it has nothing to do with their jurisdiction law. It comes to do with our beliefs and our understanding that ever since you're come out of the egg, that you're taught that you're sovereign and that these outside jurisdictions don't have any way to, they have no position in coming in and kind of throwing themselves at you. So how we need to express to these law enforcement agencies, you're never going to take this out of these people. It's easier for you to move your aggressive officers to another district.
And move your policy back.
Yeah, and move your policy back, because we're not moving.
Well, and I guess the real issue here, and I'm glad you called, Nancy, because what you're suggesting is really some, it is important. And they need to know that we're not going to change our view. And let's face it, these law enforcement agencies all have a certain level of discretion. They're not so bound by their law that they can't, when prudence takes place or should come into play, that they can't be more discreet about how they try to impose their will. So I'm glad that you called. Again, thanks for participating in the show. Matt, we're going to wind up the hour here, and I want to kind of give you last word, not because this is just your issue, but because I know that you have jumped into this thing, and we're all with you on this thing. But I don't know if you want any final thoughts on on the issue in general or about the meeting tomorrow.
One thing I wanted to stress for tomorrow's meeting, in order for this to work, we have to make this, I know it's the heart of the political season for elections here on territory, but we have to make this non-political in that aspect.
Well, not election political.
Yes, not election
political. It is a political issue.
It's very political as far as what the people have to do to make it work, but it's not for the elections. I ask everybody that's coming there, please leave all of the politics at the door when it comes to that.
Your campaign buttons,
yep,
take them
take all of that off at the door. We need to come together as the Seneca people.
Yeah, this isn't about who supports who. This is about people coming together and again trying to come to one mind on this stuff.
I should change it. It's not just for the Seneca people, because it's for the community members. We have several Cayugas and Mohawks on the territory.
Not Mohawks.
There's a couple
yeah.
in there.
How big it is?
Everybody should own one, right?
Well, I mean, there's all different natives around the territory. It's not just Senecas there. That should be a part of this, because they're impacted by it also.
Okay.
Tomorrow afternoon, 5:30 at the Sailor Community Hall in the gymnasium. Come and bring a friend. Bring a good mind. No alcohol, no drugs. Let's work this out together.
And bring your stories. I guess the
Absolutely.
plan is for people to kind of, in many ways, talk about their own experiences, and so people can get a better, more rounded understanding of what the potential conflict is here. Because I think a lot of people just simply aren't aware. I mean, or they chalk it up to just such bad behavior that they'll say, "Well, that person deserved that."
As I was talking to people this week, they're saying, "Oh yeah, this happened to me. That happened to my brother." Or, everybody's got a story. They can all relate to it.
Well, okay. Well, hopefully the meeting tomorrow is well attended. I realize that we're not serving food.
I don't have no budget.
But I encourage people, and frankly, even from other territories, this is something that people can take back to their own territories to say, well, look, this is what the Senecas are doing. So I encourage others to participate. I know you haven't necessarily put that out there, but I think from an observation standpoint, it would make sense for people to participate at all levels.
It is community.
All right. Okay. Well, we're going to take a break here and come back for the second hour. We're going to talk about the Seneca Diabetes Foundation conflict, and we'll cover all that in this next hour. So this is John Kane with Matt Hill, Ed Schindler, and Ross John in studio. We'll be right back. Talk Native. This is hour 2. Oh, not yet. Okay. Really developed last week. As we mentioned here on the show, and for those that don't know, certainly if you're Seneca, you know this is election season, and with election season, sometimes it brings out the worst in almost all cultures. But it's interesting because it seems like the Seneca Nation, at least at some level, by certain people, have really stooped to a low point in what they're considering acceptable election politics. And what I'm referring to is the president of Seneca Nation decided that he was going to hold a press conference. I think it was on last Thursday. And he kind of leaked out that he was going to have this press conference where he was going to slam Barry Snyder for missing money from the Seneca Nation, and that was the teaser. So on Wednesday, all I kept hearing was, "Oh yeah, there's going to be a big press conference, a big news conference the next day," and it was about monies that are missing from the Seneca Nation, and they made it sound like there was that a crime had been committed, and of course, as information started to leak out a little bit more, by the time Thursday morning came around, it was a little bit more clear what they were going to do, and of course, then they had their press conference. And again, they issued a press release, and the press release, the heading says, Seneca officials call for diabetes charity probe. Well, for one thing, and Ross, you know the circumstance.
Sure.
There were no Seneca officials, there was just Rob Porter.
Right.
Now, he did, when he had this press conference, he did have Richard Nephew, who is a counselor, who also happens to be running for president against Barry Snyder, and he had 2 other counselors. He had Nikki Seneca and Travis Jimerson there, but there was no council resolution. There was no, and in fact, there was never any kind of approved, even executive order, from what I understood, calling for this thing, and yet they not only leaked this to the press, but they ended up having a press conference in Buffalo at Rob Porter's PR firm, Eric Maurer and Associates. They had this press conference there. So there's Rob Porter with 3 counselors, and from what I understand, they even denied access for 8 other counselors who wanted to hear what this press conference was about.
If this was an official act and authorized by counselors, they sure didn't allow them into the building.
Well, and let's be clear here. There is no missing money. And what they kind of said in their press release and at their press conference was what they were questioning was whether enough money was coming back to the Seneca Nation specifically, or to the Seneca people from the Seneca Diabetes Foundation. Now let's be clear, the Seneca Diabetes Foundation it's a not-for-profit, it's a charitable organization that is incorporated under New York State, from what I understand.
Right.
It's a 501c3.
501c3.
So they have to do all of the required. In fact, 501c3s have to go through a pretty high level of reporting. Because charity organizations are oftentimes under a lot of scrutiny. But what Porter was claiming was that not enough of the money that the Seneca Nation was donating to this charity organization was coming back in direct charitable contributions from the Diabetes Foundation.
But I want to back up a little bit, because we first started talking about the authority of the president to be able to pull this and use nation resources.
Which Eric Maurer Associates is funded by the
Associates.
Seneca Nation.
So there's going to be dollars that are going to be spent on this. There has been contract personnel that have been used for this, and he does not have the authority to ask for this investigation. In fact, he knows. I just don't know the other counselors that he dragged along understand.
Or the people.
Or the people that he dragged along.
So
now,
this is an illegal act.
This is an illegal act. In fact, I'm going to say it's an impeachable act, but I think part of it is that they're thinking, well, we're not going to have another council so that things can be acted upon before this election. But I dare say people should watch out. Because the other thing,
well, three of these guys are still going to be on council.
They're still going to be on council, and what they are is they're speaking for the voice of the Seneca Nation. Now, councilors don't have that ability to do that.
Now, Ron Porter may not be a part of this next administration.
He may not be,
but these
three
guys who stood beside him, so they actually stuck their necks out for Rob.
Sure did. Wow. Sure did. In fact, there probably really should be a way to address this, and you have to ask the next administration, councilors and councilors that are now sitting, that you can't just duck. You can't just hand over your authority to people to abuse it that way. You know, what are you guys going to do about it? You know, because what do you have? You have Richard Nephew stepping up there, basically elevating this position as what they're going to call the council leader. And what is the council leader?
Yeah, because the following, the press release that came out, and we're going to talk a lot more about the first one, but the second one that came out, it actually said that the Seneca Nation President Robert Odawe Porter and Council Chairman Richard Nephew released the following statement in regards to the nation's demand. So again, now you got Richard Nephew, who is claiming to have a certain amount of authority just as council leader without any council approval.
But they've thought that, and the rest of the council and a good part of the nation understand that that's not true. The council leader basically is a voice for the rest of the council. When they come together, it's not a voice. It's not the voice of the council. He doesn't carry their voice, and I mean he doesn't carry his opinion.
He can't speak for them.
In
he
fact,
can only carry their own voice.
In fact, if he's going to work with an ethics that position puts for, is that he has very little voice. In fact, he's the one that's directed by the rest of the council, by whatever format they put forward, by council resolution or.
Well, and the implication here is
by
him standing up with the president, it makes it look like both the president and the council are of one mind on this thing, and clearly 8 councilors who tried to go to this meeting were denied access.
Look, they put it on official Seneca Nation letterhead. Now, you have the president's office up there, you have the treasurer's office up there that had nothing to do with this.
In fact, let's clear that up. Brad John, who was the treasurer, he didn't want to have any part of this. He wouldn't show up at the press conference.
Right.
So the guy who should know about the money issues associated with the Seneca Nation, the treasurer, who coincidentally, this is what Rob Porter is running for, and we're going to get into some number crunching here as we get into this thing a little bit. But Brad John, who is the treasurer, actually didn't want to even be a part of this. So one of the executives, the one who's charged with more of the fiscal responsibility, said, "No way, I'm not going to be a part of this."
Don't drag me into it.
Don't drag me into it. That's kind of telling.
But now you got the majority of the councils. You have the Seneca Nation and Indians, the majority of the councils. What does 2 or 3 councilors have the authority to put their name on the letterhead, the official letterhead of the Seneca Nation, and be able to kind of put these statements forward without the consent of the rest of the people around them?
Well, I've been wondering about Eric Maurer Associates. This is a pretty substantial PR firm. You just question what are they thinking when they issue this kind of stuff. And again, as we get into some of the details that are involved with this press release, you think this is a professional organization that has allowed some of these things to be put out with their names on it too.
They should be asking for the same things that everybody else is. Where's the council resolution? Where's the resolution that came together to put this? You know, what was the principles that you guys used to come to this kind of determination? Was there actually some kind of determination put together through findings?
They're also doing conclusions and without an investigation. Rob Porter went there and basically stipulating conclusions as if they had done an investigation, and then doing accusations directed toward Barry Snyder. And that's what, it drags a lot of people into this because there
Well,
are people.
let's be clear. Their target here is the main person that Rob Porter and Richard Nephew feel like they've got to compete against for the presidency and ultimately for Rob to even hang in there, going from the president to the treasurer, is the competing Seneca party, of which Barry Snyder is running for president. So there's no question that to do this thing 3 weeks before the election, that there's no question that this is purely an election stunt, that this was an attempt to take shots at Barry Snyder, and the way they leaked it out the day before, making it sound like there was missing funds and that kind of thing.
Sure.
There's no question that this is an election stunt.
Yeah.
Exactly. I'd have to agree with that 110%.
Well, and again, explain a little bit about what the Seneca Diabetes Foundation is.
Well, the Seneca Diabetes Foundation was put together in 2005. Now it has a broad range of ability to invest dollars, but I think one of the things that is missing, maybe we can get through it, is that I can understand why the president and a few of these counselors don't understand what a legacy fund is.
Well, because let's face it, governments, including now, and the Seneca Nation government never operated this way, but governments like the state governments, the federal government, they spend dollars that they don't